Okay, so mindset for the exam. You're the almighty, all powerful project manager, and you're working this huge project that's changing the world. You've been hired as a consultant in this major company that has, we'll say, a minimum of about 5,000 employees. The right hand don't know what the left hand is doing, but this project is so special they had to bring in the guru, which is you. All right. So you speak a language called PMI isms all the time. So even when it comes to the test, you don't use regular vernacular. You're going to use the PMI isms in terms of the tools, in terms of the inputs and outputs, and in terms of how you do the work. All right. And as a project manager, you understand that a project has to be broken down into phases, small, manageable pieces, so that each phase produces some type of deliverable that moves on to the next phase and the next phase and so forth. All right, so your job is to manage each phase of the project. Nothing happens on your project unless it's first planned, and since you're an outside consultant that's coming in, you want to have the experts within the organization help you with their how-tos. Okay, so the very first process is develop the project charter. That gives you the authorization to work the project. That also gives you the high-level scope, schedule, cost, some of the risks that's associated with it, but it names you as the parent. You now own the project. So the project charter gives you the authorization to apply the organizational resources to the project. The must-have or the input in order to develop the project charter, you need the statement of work, the business case, and a contract or an agreement. Okay, so those are your inputs. The actions or the tools that you're going to use is your expert judgment. The end result, you're going to have that project charter. Once you have the project charter, you're going to start identifying stakeholders immediately. All right, because you need to know who's relevant. So when you're identifying stakeholders, you're getting project management team members, you're getting project team members, you're figuring out who exactly is your customers, who influences your customers' decisions. You're also determining like your change control board members and who's going to be on the team, who's your SMEs, who's your experts, who's going to really help out based on that high level that you already have. Now, as a project manager, we do not work to the charter because now we're professional. So once we have the authorization, we're going to actually help our stakeholders get clear on their scope. We're going to help them get clear on their schedule. We're going to help them get clear on their budget. Okay, so the high level is just a starting point. All right. When we identify our stakeholders, the tools that we're going to do using that is a stakeholder analysis, because not only do we want to know who's relevant, we want to analyze how they're going to react in certain situations. We want to analyze what's their importance, what's their relevance, are they friend or foe? You know, we're going to do all this analysis, and the end result, we're going to have a register. So the register is going to name each individual and what type of influence, impact, power they're going to have on the project. All right, so once we have our charter, some of the management team members who are responsible for their domains, they're going to start doing their part. So your project management team members, just like you're like the head coach and they're your assistant coaches. So they don't do the work of the project, but they do define the how-tos in terms of structure, in terms of boundaries, in terms of budget allocation, in terms of time constraints and which resources that we have, what resources we're going to use to do time, what resources are we going to use to handle the budget, things of that nature. So your scope manager is going to join. That's equivalent to like a business analyst, and they're going to create the rules for this is how we get scope information on a project. This helps out so that your IT department, your marketing department, your sales department, your customer service department, all the different functional areas that's on the project have the rules for how we're going to do this. All right. They're going to also define how we're going to gather requirements on a project. All right. Your time manager, they're going to determine what tool we're going to use for scheduling. What are the variances that are acceptable? How we're going to use this tool. They're going to define your schedule management plan. The cost manager going to do the cost management plan. House funds going to be allocated for risk. House funds going to be allocated throughout the project so that everyone knows this is the rules, this is how you get funded, this is how we do what we do. All right, your quality manager is going to define the quality rules because your company may have different quality methodologies. When I worked at AT&T, we literally had different quality methodologies. One department used TQM, another department used Six Sigma, another department they were going through CMMI compliance. So everybody kind of had their own thing. So what the quality manager does in this project, we're going to use Six Sigma. And here's how it's done. And they define the rules for that so that everyone that comes on a project, that's working on a project, understands that we're all doing Six Sigma. So that when we're in a conversation and we're talking about on-time metrics, we're all on the same page, paragraph, and sentence. All right. Your HR manager, of course, is going to do the HR management plan. They're going to talk about how resources are going to be allocated to the project, how it's going to be staffed to the project. So all of these different management plans are created in parallel. Okay, so we're not waiting for one to finish before the next one starts. So I want you to think of all the blue dots on your chart. These are all your different management plans. Now, the area that the project manager owns is integration, because as a project manager, I'm an integrator. I'm bringing together functional areas, the project management domains and methodologies, in addition to the different process groups. I'm bringing all that together. So there's some complexity that the project manager manages within each phase of the project. All right, so now that we have all our different management plans done, that's going to roll up into one document called the project management plan. Now we're going to get more granular, more specific. So now we're going to help our clients, our stakeholders, get clear on what's the scope. So again, like I said, the project manager we own integration. We also own communications, because 90% of what we do as a project manager is communicate. We also own stakeholder management. We have to manage these stakeholders. So once we get in helping them get clear on what they want, we're going to have some team members and some management team members. They're going to help us to collect requirements. Who are we collecting requirements from? Our stakeholders, our customers. Those are going to be impacted by the project, both positive and negative. So there's a lot of tools and techniques used in the collect requirements process. So what goes into that is the project charter and the stakeholder register. Okay? And the tools and techniques that we use through that, we got focus groups, we got facilitated workshops, we got questionnaires and surveys, we have prototypes. So we have all these different tools and techniques. We're going to do some interviews, all of these different tools and techniques to get all, not some, but all of the requirements. We're going to do some brainstorming. We're going to do some affinity diagrams. Once we brainstorm, we're going to group everything in order based on different departments, make sure we understand more about it. Once we collect all requirements, we're going to document them. So we're going to have our requirements documentation. Now, the requirements documentation is going to list probably more requirements than the team actually needs, because then the customer realizes, oh, we're asking for a lot. They want the world, they can only pay for the street. Okay? So once we've collected all requirements, then we're going to get definitive with the scope. Okay? So defined scope is getting definitive. It's getting specific. It's getting focused on what we're going to deliver for you. All right? And if you think of the word scope, the word scope means see. So we're going to help our client see what we're going to deliver based on what they said they needed and they wanted, because requirements is just simply gathering needs and wants. All right. Now, the detailed description of what's going to be in this particular project is what we're doing in the defined scope process. All right. So what goes into that is that requirements document. The tools and techniques we're going to use in that is alternatives generation. All right, so alternatives generation, that's when we stretch our thinking, think of different ways to get the work done. We're not thinking about just one way. And we're going to do a product analysis, because a product analysis helps us logistically figure out what makes sense to do it. The end result of that, we're going to have our scope statement. Now, the scope statement is going to be a document that's going to be used for all future project decisions. So in that scope statement, you have what's in scope, what's out of scope. You actually have the scope clearly defined. You also have your constraints, you have your user acceptance criteria, you have your actual deliverables. All right, so that scope statement is extremely detailed. In many cases, it could be 1,000 pages. Your customer is not going to read that. Okay, so what you need to do now is create a work breakdown structure. So the work breakdown structure is a visual of what we're going to deliver. So the lowest level of the work breakdown structure is your work packages. So we're going to decompose the different things that the customer said they wanted, and we're going to get to a deliverable level so they can see each component that's going to be delivered. So as we're doing the work of the project, we're going to get them to sign off on various deliverables throughout. Okay, so again, the tool is decomposition. The end result, we're going to have a work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure has 3 components. It has a control account, the planning package, and the work package. The work package is what we're concerned with, because that's what we're going to deliver on the project. Once the customer signs off on it and say, yes, you're the bomb.com, that's exactly what we want, that's it, is baseline. No more plans about what you need and want. No more plans about specifically how we're going to make that happen for you to see it. This is it. Any changes that comes to that going forward will have to go through the integrated change control process. So the scope baseline is going to roll up into the project management plan. So that's our scope basis that we're going to work from going forward. So now we can start getting into the activity area for those individual work packages. So we're going to define activities. Remember, the schedule management plan was done very early on, as soon as we identified stakeholders, right? So we're not looking to do that now. Now we're going to detail all of the different activities that's required to create the work package. So define activities, that's the next process. And this is getting every activity. We're going to create an activity list. So again, we use decomposition there because we're going to get every activity that's required to make that work package a reality. All right, now, when we do our activity lists, the activity list, we got to put those tasks in order. So we got to sequence them. We got to figure out the relationships and dependencies, what can be done in parallel, what needs to go first, what needs to go second. And this is important. You may run into a risk when you sequence your activities, okay? And you could have cascading dependencies. One thing go wrong is the domino effect on everything else, right? So that goes in your risk register. Like if you run into a risk, say, ooh, this may be a problem, that goes into your risk register. That's a identified risk. Once the risk is identified, based on what we talked about yesterday, the next thing we need to do is analyze it. Okay, so we're going to rank it. We're going to see where does it fall among all the other risks. So that's the qualitative analysis. Once we go through the qualitative analysis, if it's high enough, we're going to quantify it. Once we quantify it, we're going to respond to it. That response may be additional task. Okay, so and I want you to see that as you're going along, communication risk is happening concurrently with all of the planning on the project. All right, next we're going to estimate our activity resources. Oh my goodness, you may run into a risk. You may be resource constrained. All right, so when you're estimating resources is done in parallel with estimate costs because of that time cost trade-off. All right, the resources, money, people, supplies, material, anything that's needed to get the work done. When you're estimating your resources, you're going to look at some alternatives analysis, and you're going to do a bottom-up estimate. All right, so a bottom-up estimate is when you take the WBS work packages and you take each individual activity, and then you detail out all the different resources that you're going to need for each, and then you kind of roll it up to that level. All right, now when you estimate resources, you're going to figure out what resources are required. If you run into a risk, it goes in the risk register. Once it's identified, you then qualify it. Once you qualify it, you quantify it. Once you quantify it, you respond to it. All right, and that response might be a solution to your resource problem. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to estimate durations. Now, in order to estimate durations, of course, you got to have your activity list, and you need to know your resource requirements, because if I have 10 people versus 5 people, it does make a difference in terms of how long it's going to take. So when we're estimating durations, that goes into how long it's going to take and how much work effort needs to be put into it. And that's also broken down into units. So units can be days, weeks, meters, liters, tons, hours, quarters, things like that. So you're going to determine what that unit is going to be in your estimate durations process. In the estimate durations process, that's when we run into some of the other estimating tools. We have our analogous estimate, which is the actual estimate from the last time we did it, comes from senior management, may not be accurate. In terms of the other type of estimates that we have our reserve analysis, we have our parametric estimating, and we have our 3-point estimating. Okay, one of the things that you're going to definitely have to know is what's the advantages of each. We know that the best form of estimating is bottom up. It's the most accurate. And that's what we do as project managers. Typically, the other estimates come from relying on others. So they are a risk in itself. So that all that goes in your risk register. Once it's identified, you qualify. Once you qualify, you quantify. Once you quantify it, you respond to it. And it's all happening, during your planning. So now that we've estimated the duration for each individual activity, we can now develop the schedule. This is really where you're going to have the majority of the questions on time on the real PMP exam. So when you're developing a schedule, what the project manager does, you analyze everything that's going on the project from every department, every path, and you want to determine which path is going to take the longest to get done. That becomes your critical path. The critical path is real. This is how long it's really going to take to do the project. That may differ from the time that's in the charter or the time that your management told you that you have to get it done. That is a risk. You put it in a risk register because remember, the work hadn't started yet. So once it's identified, we then qualify it. Once we qualify it, we quantify it. Once we quantify it, we respond to it. All right. So once we find out how long it really takes and the client is your customer or your stakeholder is fine with that, we're going to baseline it. This is it. We're not having another meeting about all the activities, all the tasks, the resources, any of that. This is it. This is your critical path. So now we have our triple constraints. We have our work packages. We have our critical path. Now we're going to figure out, okay, how much all this stuff is going to really cost. Now that we know what we're doing and how long it's going to take to get it done, how much is it really going to cost? So the next process, we're going to estimate all costs on the project. Remember, we have a risk register that was being built all along. So there's money in there that's going to be estimated. There's also estimates from each individual activity that's going to be tallied up as well. And then we're going to have our cost estimates for each individual thing. And then in the next process, we're going to determine a budget by aggregating it all. So once we aggregate it all, we're going to have our budget. That becomes your budget at completion. That is real. Once the customer signs off on it, that is it. So we have our triple constraints. We have our work packages. We have our critical path. And we have our budget at completion. That is our project. Now the work can get started, because you can't just execute scope without time and money. You can't execute time without knowing what you're doing and how much money you have to get it done, right? So all of that is integrated together, which is why there are no individual executing processes for scope, time, and cost, or risk. There's no individual executing processes for those because they don't work alone. All right, so now that we have work, we know what work needs to be done. The team can now start doing the work. The process where the team actually does the work is direct and manage project work. That's the process where the work actually gets executed. What is the work? The work is scope, time, and cost integrated. The work is work packages, the critical path, and the budget at completion, all together integrated. All right, so while the team is executing in parallel at the same time, the project manager and the project management team, they are watching. So this actually happens at the same time. So what are we watching for? We're watching for work performance data as the work is being done on a daily basis, and we're keeping our stakeholders updated with what's happening. So what's happening while the work is being done, not fully complete, we are communicating. All right, so what happens, the work performance data comes from here. It goes into monitoring and control, where we control the scope, control schedule, control costs, all at the same time, control quality, control risk, all that's happening into it, all together, and we're going to get work performance information. When we compare that to our baseline, we're going to get work performance information. That work performance information is in the monitoring and control process. We put it into a report form, and that report is the status messages that we give to our stakeholders. Now, all stakeholders don't get the same message, right? Senior management want milestone, middle management may want more detail. So this is happening back and forth until we complete work. All right, so when the work is fully complete, we don't have work performance data, we actually have a deliverable. The deliverable, in a perfect world, will go into control quality, where the team that did the work would do the verification and the validation to make sure it's correct using a bunch of different tools and techniques. And then once they validate it, then it becomes verified. Well, not validate. Once they verify that it's correct, then I, as the project manager, bring in the sponsor or the customer and say, okay, pay me, right? You like it? Do you like it? Yes, let's pay me. So that happens in the validate scope process, and then from there we go to close. Now, what if the customer does not like it? It's defective. What happens here, it goes back into, it's a change request, and we process the change here. We update the plan, and then we're in this continuous loop until this deliverable gets accepted. Once it gets accepted, we close. All right, now all projects do not have procurement, but in some situations we may have to bring in someone from outside our organization to help or assist with the project. For the test, you will have procurement. As a matter of fact, you have more than 30 questions on a real test in reference to procurement. So the way procurement works is, in the planned procurement process, this is where we're planning everything. We're planning the contract we're going to use. We're planning what we're purchasing. We're planning how we're going to measure what our vendors do. We're planning all the different contract phases and phrases, rather. We're doing a very extensive contract management process. All right, once that's done, in the execute, our job, we don't execute deliverables. Our execution here is to award a contract. We're going to award a contract to a seller. And once that seller has signed off and we are in contract, it's like a marriage, that is it. So I want you to be really careful when you're taking test questions. If it clearly shows you already have a contract, meaning you have someone, a seller already doing it, you don't go backwards. The next process is either control procurements or close procurements. Control is when we're watching and reporting what's going on. We're observing what they're doing. Closing, I'm accepting the complete work once you've done it. Okay. Now, keep in mind there are two processes where deliverables are accepted, and you will get that question on the test. They're accepted in the validate scope process because I have a customer, and they're accepted in the closed procurements because I am the customer. All right. In all of the different knowledge areas, integration, scope, time, cost, quality, human resources, communications, risk, and stakeholder management, I am the project manager, so I have a customer. In procurement, I am the customer. Okay, so that's the only knowledge area where you're actually the customer. All right. The other thing is the entire project is all about scope. So I kind of gave you that spiel when we were going through it. All right. So scope is what we're doing. Everybody needs to see it. Time is the activities required to do the scope. Cost is the budget required to do the scope. Quality is just making sure that the scope is met. Human resources is getting the project team to do the scope. Communications is communicating information to our stakeholders what's happening with the scope. Risk management is being proactive, anticipating problems that will prevent me from meeting the scope. Procurement is getting someone outside my project team to kind of help me with the scope. And then stakeholder management is building trust and keeping them engaged the entire time so that they realize that we're doing what they wanted, which is the scope. So the whole project is literally wrapped up into scope. And that is literally what we learned all week, project management in a nutshell. You have any questions?